I think the gap in thinking sometimes when it comes to a financial brand, marketing team, a sales team, a leadership team is historically, if we go back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I do X with marketing, I get Y a week later or a month later. But you and I know that the buying journey for financial products is an extremely complex one. And sometimes it takes 60, 90, 180 days to build that relationship. So talk to me a little bit about how can I take that contrarian point of view to your point, to overcome some of that resistance. Like if I do X, well, I should get Y. If I send out this direct mail piece, I get these leads for loans. But I had that same thinking. If I post this content on social media, shouldn't I get the same thing?
Yeah. So I love talking about this, James, because it's just, you and I have both put out enough content in the world to know that sometimes it results in immediate return. Oftentimes it doesn't. So I'll share two stories. I put out a deck on LinkedIn yesterday, and it's got, I think, 17 or 18,000 views on it. Incredible results. Organic, didn't put a dime of paid ad spend behind it. I found somebody on LinkedIn that I really respect. I synthesized 3 of his big ideas, had our creative director turn it into a deck, put it up, tagged him in it. He obviously commented on it because he really liked it. It was flattering to him. A bunch of his followers ended up seeing it, produced a ton of results, or a ton of eyeballs. That afternoon, yesterday afternoon, we ended up having an inbound lead come in as a direct result of them seeing that deck and being like, hey, could you guys do something like this for us? I know that you guys produce podcasts. We're looking at producing a podcast. Let's set up a conversation. So I sent him over to Logan on our team, director of partnerships. And who knows, maybe that turns into something, maybe it doesn't, but that's a tangible result of me putting out a deck and it performing well because the content was actually good and helpful for my intended audience. Another story, so that's great. That's what everybody expects to happen every time. The reality is that's the exception to the rule. That rarely happens, if I'm completely honest. What usually happens, and this is another story. Earlier this month, we ended up closing a deal with a software company. We're going to start producing their podcast. And this woman that was the decision maker at this company, we featured on a virtual summit that we hosted 3.5 years ago. And we featured the CMO who they ended up doing this episode in like a sauna in there because they were in some other country where saunas were a big deal. And we created this piece of content. And Christine is the girl that is now our customer. Christine was on the marketing team of the CMO that I was interviewing for that virtual summit. The CMO ends up moving companies like a year later. We end up working with that CMO at her other company. But then Christine, as she graduates and gets, more skilled and professionally develops, she is now a decision maker in the marketing team for I think she's been at 2 or 3 companies since that company where we originally met her. But she's now a decision maker. And because I've nurtured that relationship with her, I saw her in New York whenever I was on a New York trip a couple years ago. I've stayed in contact with her. We're connected on LinkedIn. She probably saw the deck that I put out too. She sees the content that I'm putting out on LinkedIn. I'm nurturing that relationship with her through the content we're putting out. And when her new company now is talking about doing a podcast, who she calls us. That was 3.5 years in the making for that to happen.
Sure.
Now we ended up doing business with her CMO a little bit quicker than that, maybe a year afterwards. But I think even in you saying 30, 60, 90 days, I'm like, man, that'd be nice if it always worked out in 30, 60, 90 days. But if you're playing the long game, yes, and if these financial brands, I think, are trying to play the long game, like relationships are the ultimate long game play. And so I think investing in a relationship, go back to our example of like CEOs at construction companies, maybe they just signed a $14 million loan with another bank, a competitor, and you're like, man, they're not going to need any more funding for years. Build the relationship with them now, because in 7 years, when they need to take out a $100 million loan because they're continuing to expand, and you've built that relationship with them, I bet you're going to be pretty dang glad that you spent 7 years nurturing that relationship.
Yeah, and in that point of that 30, 60, 90 days, it really is dependent upon whatever product it is. The more complex the product, the longer the buying cycle. And commercial, yeah, I mean, that could be a multi-year, quote unquote, deal in the making. I even think, you're referencing your LinkedIn slide deck, and we were talking about him, Chris Walker, because I think even Chris Walker posted something on LinkedIn recently to where he said it takes 60 to 90 engagements or interactions with his content before someone becomes a client of his. So this is, to your point, this is a long play. And let's talk about this from a sense of investment, since we're talking financial services. I'm using content to invest in the future. I might not see the result in the present moment. So that's a big transformation in thinking. And so if I'm making an investment in the future, I would take the analogy of this. It's almost like making a deposit into the trust fund of the mind of the consumer. And it's going to take time, but the more deposits that you make, the more interest you'll gain, the more trust you'll build. And whenever someone is ready to raise their hand saying, I need help, because that was another key word you use. This is about helping first and selling second. Another cultural transformation mind shift right there. So let's talk about that, helping first, selling second, because this is about taking a journalistic approach. And my take is this: the future of marketing and sales teams will transform into almost like micro media teams.
Yep. I completely agree. We're actually transforming our service-based business into a media company. I mean, we've changed how we refer to ourselves as we're a podcast first media company. Now, the bulk of our revenue, 88% of our revenue comes from producing podcasts for shows we don't own, for B2B software companies that aren't a part of our collective shows. They're not contributing to our content. We're just producing their content. That's the bulk of our revenue right now. But the future of our business is in building our own properties, in building our show, B2B Growth. We've also got B2B Sales Show, the Manufacturing Show, Craft and Culture, the CIO Show. We're building these shows in different industries because I believe ultimately that media companies have all of the leverage, because they have the attention of the consumer. And so if you can transform your financial services company, your bank, your credit union, whatever, into the modern day newspaper in your city or your region, the modern day TV show, the modern day insert whatever it is, radio show, whatever, if you can become the media hub for your area and deliver helpful content over and over and over and over again, who do you think those people are going to go to when they inevitably need what you have to offer?
Yeah, be the media company, because the media company has the eyeballs, they have the attention, they have the ears of the people within the communities that they serve. And the way that I look at this, people want three things in their life. They want to feel healthy. They want to be wealthy, and that doesn't mean be a bazillionaire, but I just don't want to have to worry about money and have some financial peace. And they want to be happy. But where people have that stress is right there in the middle financially, and that financial stress takes a toll on a person's physical well-being and their mental well-being. And where I see financial brands, and maybe you can speak to this, where I see financial brands get hung up a little bit is they think, oh, I have to operate in this box of talking about loans and deposits and checking accounts. I disagree. You can become a lifestyle brand focused on the physical health and the mental well-being, and we also do these loans.